Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on the state of the Malazan Empire. It's still falling, only more so. Today, we're going to talk about the rest of Book 2 of the Bonehunters. And more people are falling, quite literally, and all of that. So let's get right into it. But first, a quick update on the scarf. It's getting even longer. And yeah, I'll probably have to add yet like another like the same length to actually make it be a full scarf and everything, but we're getting there is what I'm trying to say. Anyway, let's get started with talking about this book, right? Cheers. All right, so I just finished book 2 of the Bonehunters, and I'll pick up a few things that I think are worth talking about in this second part. It's not, there's a lot of philosophy going on there, but let's just, for a second, admire Steven Eriksson's capabilities of delivering this, like, brutal gut punch of a first chapter, that chapter 7, where, like, the whole Igatan thing. Let's just admire him doing that, and then, like, delivering a bunch of more really brutal situations near the end of that second book, with the end of Heboric and that attack of the Talani mass there and everything like that, right? That's just brutal. like if you thought, like, after this big battle there's like time for you to actually step back and breathe and recover from all the brutality, nope, it's not. But anyway, that's not so much what I wanted to talk about today, because I feel while it's definitely interesting, I feel there's more interesting things that I wanted to talk about that happen before Heberic gets killed and all these other things happen. And a bunch of those things I feel are connected once again to the kind of thing that I'm always looking at, and that's like, my whole problem with religion and stuff like that, which I feel we get a lot of more insight in there, and that's what I found fascinating. Like, on the one hand, you have that discussion between Heberic and Crocus, Cutter, and Silara about what made Bidithal's cult, behind that the cult, or like in general, yes, the cult of the crippled god, so powerful. The idea of a of salvation. That's like where we come to a really interesting thing, because that is the idea of salvation in an afterlife is something that is, I don't know, I wouldn't say unique, but it's something that certainly the more monotheistic religions of our time have, if not pioneered, then definitely turned into like their major brand, right? And especially as an answer to the actual, like, the realization that you are that our world is broken, and we as people, most of us, are broken in our world. It's like, yeah, it doesn't matter, get rid of all of that, and then you'll end up in that kind of paradise. Now, there's a bunch of ways to go about that, and I feel that the crippled god, while being just one god there, is leaning more towards the more Gnostic, dualist side of things, where the idea of salvation of the soul after death, in the afterlife, is very much more connected to the idea of like self-loathing, or like a general denial of the physical body and the physical creation. That's something that kind of shines through there, although it's like not explicit, and we don't have any of that theology there, right? We never had. But I feel that with the like focus on fleshly imperfections, in a way, you have that. On the other hand, you also have that in a way in early Christianity, when you look at everyone's favorite idea, and that's the martyring of the flesh, which is something that a lot of monastic orders did in in early Christianity and up to like the early Middle Ages. Is like you decide to actually abhor your body, your own body, in a way that is like important, because that, cleanses your from this physical realm, which a world which is fundamentally flawed, and it's all about the spirit. So we have that in there, and it's rightly stated that it is a very seductive, very powerful brand of religion. And it's, I think Cutter said that like that kind of religion would conquer, or Solara would conquer the entire world. Well, yes, because the idea of like realizing that this world in which we live, this physical creation is flawed, and we as human beings suffer in it. Like, I mean, we might not really all suffer that much, but it's definitely something that we kind of recognize that we do. And we recognize that the world is not perfect. We recognize the suffering in others. We recognize all these things. But then we get told that this is just like the valley of darkness, basically, that we need to walk through, and on the other side there comes like salvation after death. Now, since this is the Malazan universe and this is the Malazan Book of the Fallen, we're not talking about full-on like theology here. We're not going to talking about like what you need to do in real life, like in the Malazan world, to achieve that salvation. On the other hand, there is not like nothing there that needs it. And like, there's interesting discussion there with once again with Heboric talking about the question of whether salvation would be meaningless if it doesn't require anything from the people to be saved, right? That's a very interesting situation to look at, and that's the one thing that we need to return back again and again and again, is like the acceptance of everyone despite their flaws, despite their brokenness, and the promise of salvation afterwards. Now, obviously, we don't know if that promise was going to be fulfilled. We get some very interesting insights into the realm of the dead in this specific chapters as well, in these specific chapters as well, right? One of those being the fact that apparently Hood's realm is kind of like, Hood doesn't really care about his realm. Like most people that die there just, end. That's it. But I don't want to go there quite yet. Right? So let's look at some other things that we have there. We have the long discussion between the ghost of Hedge's ghost, and Ganoes Paran about how ascendancy works, what makes an ascendant, what makes a god, what makes an unaligned ascendant. And that's something that I find very interesting. Like the general idea that you have these that ascendancy is something that is inherent in human or like beings' nature, that you have people with more will that assert their will, and that over time that helps them to gather force, to gather power, to have a bigger, like larger, greater efficacy, is the word that Paran uses there. And that is something that you can, like, it kind of, now obviously when you look at the Malazan world of the Fallen, it manifests sometimes quite literally with that idea of someone punching someone through a wall. But on the other hand, the realization that to a certain point, willpower, only up to a certain point. I'm not going to go into like this hardcore, like nihilistic, existentialistic way of looking at things, but to a certain point, willpower is exactly what over time might bring you things that then will give you greater efficacy. The will to actually assert power, to gather power, whether it's monetary or whatever other kind of power. Those kind of things work in our real world just as well as in the Malazan world. It's just rarely, manifests in the way that it does in a world where magic is real. But the general concept of willpower gathering, the gathering of willpower, no, not that way, that willpower helps us gather power that has a quite literal efficacy and influence on the real world around us. That's just true. It's like just, and it's only very few people who manage to do that over time. You can certainly look at people nowadays that have that kind of efficacy that in our real world you would probably think of ascendance in a way, like not fully ascendant obviously, but that in our mundane magic free world come go in that direction. And those might be people that you know in whatever way manage to put their, like, make their way to the top of their home country, home state, like government, which will probably be a very autocratic government by the time they arrive at the top of it, by sheer willpower. And that gives them, military power and probably monetary power used sooner or later, because usually autocratic rulers are kleptocrats at the same time. So they find all kinds of ways to assert their efficacy. And what brought them there in the end is just willpower, right? Same with people who are very smart and then go a more like capitalist, maybe scientific way there. Like your Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk type of people. They, through asserting their will, and make no mistake, there's a lot of willpower in there, right? And some technical ideas or clever ideas and so forth, manage to really gain a larger efficacy in the real world by just their willpower over time. And that is something that I found, just, to look at how ascendancy works in the Malazan world. Yes, it kind of works the same with us. We just should not really start worshipping those people, because then ascendants become gods, and that's a big problem, as we have found out before in the Malazan universe, right? But the general mechanisms of ascendancy in a way work with us as well. It's just that we don't have that. I hesitate to call it metaphysical, this magical underpinning of the world that structures everything like it does in the Malazan world. We're just left with mere grubby capitalism and military force, which for most people involved with our like powerful people will just have the same effect, because yeah, it still sucks to meet one of those people because they have more power than you. So there's certainly that part in there, which I guess has a rather sinister, like not sinister, but like a rather hopeless look, or not even hopeless look, but like a rather disillusioned look at how humanity as a whole works that you can drag from there. It's like, as I said, you need to work real hard to come in, not fall into this like proto-Nietzschean whatever kind of existentialist philosophy for that, and I try to not do that. But let's look at what happens then once again with how these things, manifest in the Malazan world. So like if you're able as a being to assert your will to gather more power and efficacy, you become an ascendant. And if you as an ascendant gather worshippers, you become a god. And if you then lose those worshippers, you are like something like the elder gods, like you're still around, you're still an ascendant, but you'll lose certain powers again. And yes, gathering worshippers kind of ties you down into a house as a god. You're tied down in like, you can't just do whatever the fuck you want anymore, because your worshippers kind of expect things from you, and you might get more power from having worshippers. But if you don't fulfill their expectations, if you disappoint them, then they turn away and you'll lose that power again. And losing power in that kind of power structured world where power is basically the only coin that you're looking at, efficacy, power is the only coin you're looking at, that kind of is a very, it can only be seen as a step back in a way. Whereas as an ascendant, you may not have like as much power in that situation, but you're more free in how you apply that power, how you apply that efficacy, and where you apply that efficacy. So that's just like for like understanding these underpinnings of how this ascendancy business works is I found just like a very interesting talk there. I also wanted to look at that Jaghad underworld bridge situation where they talk about that it's like basically nowhere and it's like the oldest place there. It's like this idea of it being a bridge is, I find, a very interesting situation because, a lot of that concept of life and death in our how we as human beings conceptualize the universe, I guess, is once again a binary thing in there. It's like you have these states and you need to how does he say the word there? You need to move from one state to the other. So you have all these very like typical images for transcending in a way certain from one world to another. You have Hood's Gate on the one hand, on the other you have that bridge. And when you look in like real world mythologies, you also have like bridges, whether it's your rainbow bridge in the Norse mythology, you have your obviously you have your rivers that you need to cross when you cross into the underworld. You have your your river Styx for the Greco-Roman thing there. I keep forgetting how it was when you enter the Sumerian underworld. I just know that you have to take off all your stuff and then you're stuck in a gray place that is even more bureaucratic than the Sumerian real world. That's a different a different thing to talk about. But this idea of borders and transcending borders and using images for that, like threshold, bridge, gate, is, I feel, just like that first image when you start to realize that there is more than one state, which is, I guess, when you start as a human being, or at least in a world that is, while rather much inspired and informed by the real world in a lot of ways, still the creation of authors that can basically come up with whatever explanation they find the best for what they're doing. But the idea of like when you look at how things start, and we're going back to the earlier stages because it said that this is before even holds, right? The idea there is that like you realize that there's at least two states. That's like you're alive and then people are dead. There's a state in between those, and then you come at build up everything out of that one fundamental dichotomy to everything that comes from there. So having that thing going on there is pretty, that's why I feel like the bridge makes a lot of sense there as being the image of crossing from one state into another state. As I said, a gate would make as much sense in a way, but I guess the image of a bridge is even more primal, more primordial, even though that bridge is obviously constructed. But whether it's like your tree over a river or a chasm or whatever, what have you, that's, I guess, if you wanted to go even more primal, it might have been a ford through a river, but that's as primal as it gets when it comes to images for crossing from one place to another place, in a way. Anyway, we also find out that, and this is like interesting shit going on there, like on the more like pseudo lore place. I mean, we already know that I suck at lore, so please, this is just me rambling about stuff that I find interesting. But we know that like we end up in the nascent once again after that after that, crossing that bridge that maybe like should end up like in the like proto underworld where everything basically started, and that being the nascent, which I found interesting. We get some cool powers by Paran. We then learn a lot more about Decembelakis, who was the first, like, the emperor of the First Empire, and who apparently became the Derigoth. Now I'm speculating, so don't take this seriously, but who apparently became the Derigoth, which is cool. But also, he did not invent them, but he took the Derigoth from somewhere else, the remainders of those, and put his soul into 7 of them. And then once again, he's worshipped by people in the nascent, apparently. But now that's just like an interesting like overall structure. We learn about once again this idea of the Erisal, the Imas, and the humans, and the Erisal being domesticated by the giant, by the Derigoth, which obviously is an interesting idea about humans being domesticated by wolves slash dogs, whatever it is, like a large carnivore in a way, which there might be evidence for that. I'm not the expert. I'm certainly not, an anthropologist, so I will not speculate on how that works, but the idea is just really cool. And on the other hand, you have which that's like a nice like jump for me. Like on the other hand, you have these scenes with Karsa Orlong and Samar Dev, which are relatively short scenes about where we look at some tribal hunting and stuff like that. The idea of driving a herd down a cliff, which is a very like traditional hunting method that was used in a lot of places in early times, right? And them, having wolves basically where they, take their canines out to make them less harmful, but on the way to domestication. So the it's this weird combination where on the one hand the Derigoth domesticate the Erisal, from them come the Imas or the humans, and the humans then go and domesticate dogs again, which is, I don't know where this is going, but this starts looking rather circular in a way for me, which is just an interesting thing to look at. And once again, it's one of those things which make the Malazan world as a world so wonderfully like vibrant and seems so realistic. Although I think it's like realism is not the real word there. It's more God, I'm struggling with words today. Verisimilitude is the word I was looking for. The verisimilitude or the authenticity is that. Things like, yeah, you could just like have a short passage where they travel and they see some more barbaric tribes, or more primitive. Those words are problematic. Those tribes hunting. But with Stephen Erickson, we get like a description of a realistic way of hunting from a more nomadic time, about how to hunt large animals that to kill in an actual, how to like ways to hunt large herd animals. If we would then pause and look back and look up at how to hunt bison, for example, then we will find out, yes, that's how that is done. And that, as I said, it's just like one of those aspects that make the Malazan world so how to say, yeah, make it feel so real, so vibrant, and so deep. And that's once again a really just a small detail there. We also, I mean, we still need to have a longish talk on Samar Dev and Karsa Orlong, but I feel it's not yet the time for that. What else should we talk about in these like 4 chapters? And this is so crazy, right? The rest of book 2 is basically as long as the first chapter of book 2. Well, that's certainly the images of like humanity destroying the world, the economic, not economic, but ecological damage that we as human beings leave in our like drive to exploit everything. That's definitely a topic that you can like also find in all kinds of like small details, right? You have these small details. You had these small details. I'm repeating myself a lot, but you have these things all the way over the stories. Like, yeah, and there's a hillside and like that village from the opening of this book, right? When it's described that yeah they chop down all those trees to make coffins out of them, and then the topsoil blows away and everything else is eaten up by goats, and that's how desertification works in real life as well. It's like we over tax the soil, then we just put goats on there because goats are easy to feed, but the way it goats feed is that they gnaw away like even like the bark from trees and kill trees by that. And like once you send the goats in, it's basically your landscape is basically ruined after that, unless you're like really careful. And that's like this ongoing human drive in a way to expand and not think about the consequences of that expansion is a thing that you can find in all kinds of elements of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. And the question that obviously raises is like, why, if we even understand that this is part of human nature, is there a way for us to actually consciously change that or not? That's a question that is not really asked here. It's just, it's something that shows up from time to time, again and again and again. All right. What else to talk about? Oh, yes, the nameless ones, bastards, one and all. Because we learn even more about our good friend Icarium, right? So we have that situation with Icarium waking up, and now it's Terralek Veed with him, and he's way more forceful in guiding Icarium to some place of conflict, possibly. He's very open about, yes, Icarium, you have to fight. It's the kind of thing you do. It's just vengeance that you deliver, and Icarium really doesn't want to do that. But he's because he doesn't remember anything, he falls into that. We need to have a discussion on Icarium and innocence at some point, right? Because basically Icarium is that argument of it's not the gun that kills people, it's people that kill people. He's that made flesh in a way, right? Because he's fairly innocent. He doesn't want to. Yes, but he's used by other people in a way, or like sometimes, and he obviously, while being innocent when it comes to intention most of the time, that doesn't change the fact that he's horribly dangerous, right? But as I said, these are just like some random thoughts I'm just tossing out here. There will be a full Icarium video at some point, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, so we learned that the nameless ones are apparently also responsible for the way Icarium is in general as that person with all this immense power. Now, how that worked out, I don't know. I have not read the Carcanos trilogy yet because I am the kind of person who wants to read finished series, and I'm still waiting for Walk in Shadow. Although I might just start with those two once I'm done with here the Malazan Book of the Fall, and actually go through that for the first time to actually finally get that bit that I'm still missing. But once again, we also see like how we also see how Mappo is healed, where Mappo is going now. Well, that Mappo is still with us, which I'm personally very glad, because Mappo is one of my favorite characters in the entire series. He's absolutely cool. I just feel really bad for him all the time, but I like him. What else would be interesting? I don't know. I feel that's sort of it for today. Maybe I'm still too close to the rest of the book because I basically just pushed through most of that today. Maybe I'll have some more ideas on it. I don't know. I'll take a break from reading Malazan over like for tomorrow and Sunday, and I'll be back on Monday with more Bone Hunters, possibly the start of book 3, or maybe some last thoughts on book 2. We'll see. Until then, have a great weekend. Until then, cheers.